Grace is going to be in the background should there be any technical issues, but hopefully we should be able to sail through. So this is going to be quite an interactive session where I'm going to ask you some questions and perhaps do some online sort of demystifying some jargon busting and things like that. So I'll just go, hopefully you can all see the presentation, but if we do have any technical issues, then I will get Grace to just intercept and let me know if there's any issues. So I'm just trying to get my screen so that I can see you guys as well. So just bear with me 1 second. There we go. I can see you all now as well, and I can also see the chat screen. So if you have any questions or anything, then please do put that in the chat. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a commercial finance manager, and I've been working at university hospitals, Coventry and Warwickshire, for the last 8.5 years. Before that, I've been in other acute hospitals such as Leicester and Birmingham, 10 years prior to that. So I really have a passion for sharing finance and information with my clinical and operational colleagues and trying to make it a lot more easier for you all to understand. So I thought we would kick off the session today with some jargon busting. So let's just see. We've got some acronyms on the screen, and first of all, I'd just like to know from those of you that are on the session today, how many of you actually receive budget reports or other types of financial information in your own organisations? If you just raise your hand, and then that will give me an idea of how much jargon busting I have to do. So yeah, quite a few of you. So some of these acronyms will be familiar to most of you, so we'll just go through them just for a bit of fun and a bit of ice breaking as well. So the first of all, we're going to go just starting from the top. We've got a really easy one to start off top with. I&E. Would anybody like to volunteer what they think that might stand for? Please put your answers in the chat box, and we'll see what responses we get before we move on to the next one. Yeah, brilliant. You've all got it. Income and expenditure, of course. So the main principles of finance, we talk a lot about income and expenditure, and we'll go through that later in the presentation. Then moving on to the next one on the left, which is FOT. Has anybody come across that acronym in their reports or their finance discussions? And don't worry, you can have a guess. Don't worry about getting it incorrect or anything like that. Yes, we've got Laurel at NHS Cheshire who's got that correct. Forecast outturn, yes, brilliant. The reason why that's really important is because sometimes you will see a number of finance reports and spreadsheets with these acronyms on them, and sometimes you'll think, oh, I wonder what that means. So it's really important for me to go through these with you this morning. Now, the forecast outturn is very important. Traditionally, when we look at budgets and we look at budget reports, there's always historically and traditionally been a look at the past in terms of what you have spent against your budget and what's happened in the past. But more recently, in more recent times, we've been looking more towards the future and what we think we're going to spend for the rest of the year, because that gives us a more robust prediction of where you think you're going to be at the end of the year. And I'll go through that again in a little bit more detail with you later. We then have another interesting expression called run rate, and I was wondering if anybody had heard of that at all. It's nothing to do with cricket, by the way, in case you were wondering. So I'll just explain quickly. A run rate is actually a monthly trend, and it's the rate of spend or the rate of income every month. So it's what we can call it is a spend trend, so that we can see each month what is our expenditure doing. Is it going up? Is it going down? And the same with income as well, because in your clinical roles you'll most definitely be seeing patients, and you could apply a run rate to particularly any type of activity. So, you know, you could have a look at the run rate of your outpatient attendances or your waiting list, for example. It's just to put it simply, it's a trend, and we'll go through that as well later in the session. Then in the middle of the screen, we have another acronym that is WTE, which I think you might all find fairly easy. Oops, my screen's disappeared. Yeah. Can you all still see the screen?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So yes, so you've all got that correct. That's an easy one, whole time equivalence. And whole time equivalence is also very important aspect of your budget reports, because it tells you the number of staffing that you're funded for and how many you've actually got in post. And the whole time equivalent really is converting any people that are working part-time or on part-time contracts to a full-time equivalent. So for example, if you need 10 people to run the service, but you've actually got 12 people in place because 2 of those people job share or work part-time, we convert them to a whole-time equivalent. So if somebody works 4 days a week, they would be 0.8. So just an easy example, and I think you're probably all familiar with that. We've then got below that HRG. If anybody, oh wow, Emily, very quick off the mark. Healthcare Resource Group, yes, Alison as well, well done. Healthcare Resource Group, yes, we use HRGs in coding and income. Brilliant, Emily was a coder. Excellent. Yeah, so as you know, we use HRGs to monitor the patients that we see. They get coded to particular procedure groups, and that's the income that follows each of the HRGs. So we use HRGs really to monitor our income. So when we talk about budgets, it's not always just about expenditure. We have to look at income as well. As we mentioned at the beginning, it's always about income and expenditure. So the last one then is variance, which I think is an easy one. So you'll see variance a lot. In a nutshell, the variance is the difference, and it could be a budgetary variance. So traditionally you will see underspend, overspend against budget. So if your budget was £1 million, the variance might be £200,000, and it could be underspent or overspent. When we look at variances, we also look at the forecast as well. So, for example, if you were predicting to spend £500,000 in the month, for example, but the spend was actually £600,000, we have to explain why it's different, and it could be because you had some additional agency pressures or something like that. So variances could mean against the actual budget, but it also could be a variance to what we originally predicted. And usually when we do our reports, we have to look at both things. And the same with income as well. We normally have an income plan to say that states how many patients we should be treating in the month. And again, we would look at how that has varied against what our plan is. So variance is just difference to plan or difference to prediction. So that was just a little bit of jargon busting for you. Oh, did we not do year-to-date? Sorry, missed that one. Yes, YTD is year-to-date. Brilliant, thank you. Yes, yes, and again, that's a really important one that you will see always on a budget report is how much have we spent up to now. So if you were looking at your budget reports at the end of April, it would be your spend to the end of April, so that would be 1 month in the financial year. If it was March, then it would be 12 months. So it's the accumulative spend or income to date. But again, we like to use a year-to-date spend as well as a forecast outturn as well. So thank you for pointing that out. Looks like you're all on the ball. So before I move on, I hope you found that useful. As you know, there's probably a lot more jargon that accountants use, and so I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate we use quite a lot of jargon in finance, but our aim should be to make it as simple and easy for non-finance colleagues to understand our language as much as possible. So, all right, we've got Ingrid that has just joined and has asked what FOT and INE are. I think you may have perhaps joined a little bit later, but yes, INE is income and expenditure. So when we're talking about finance reports, we look at income and expenditure. FOT is forecast outturn. So that is the prediction of where we think we're going to be by the end of the financial year. And as we go through this presentation, I will give you some examples of this so you can put that into context. So hope that's okay. So now we're going to just have a look at some examples of financial reports that you might receive. Just show your hands if you receive any of these on a regular basis. So income and expenditure reports, income, budget reports, payroll reports, staffing reports, activity and board reports, yeah. So a few of you are quite comfortable with these, and the format of these, I'll go through a sort of standard format with you. We'll go through a board report and a budget report as well as income. We'll go through some of these, but what you'll find is that the standard format in most organisations follow a similar sort of format. So the principles that I will be going through with you today, you could apply to your own reports that you receive in your own organisations. And if you don't receive these reports, then what I would suggest is if you're interested, then please contact your finance department and just make contact with whoever is your finance manager, and they should be able to let you have copies of the reports. Okay, so I'll just go through these very quickly. So income and expenditure reports is basically when we do our month-end accounts, we produce an income and expenditure report for each group. So where I work, we've got 7 sort of clinical groups or directorates or divisions, you know, whatever you call them in your own organisations, and we create what is called an income and expenditure report. I've just noticed on the screen somebody's mentioned that the slides haven't moved on. It should be showing a screen that says examples of financial reports. Has that come up on the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. I think there may be a timing delay for some people, possibly. So I'll be talking about this for a few minutes, so hopefully if you do have a timing technical glitch, then they should be available. So income and expenditure reports are what the finance team produce for each of the clinical areas. That includes the income. It also includes the budgets, the annual budgets, and that's really like a summary of how the group is doing. So it would just be like, this is the annual budget, this is what you've spent to date, these are the areas of spend, and this is where you're predicting to be at the end of the year. Usually they're quite, the reports that we do are about 10 or 12 pages long, because there's quite a lot of analysis in there that shows trends of agency and non-pay spend, pay expenditure, whole time equivalent. So all the things I've mentioned in the slide before would usually form part of an income and expenditure report. I would love to go through one with you today, but it probably take quite a long time. So I'm just going to use extracts of one just to give examples. So income report shows number of patients that we should be seeing and our target income and how we're doing against that. And that's usually broken down by things like the point of delivery of the patients. So whether it's elective, day case, emergency, outpatients, and they're the 5 usual categories of sort of activity or patient types. Then we have budget reports, which you probably receive on a monthly basis, that shows for your cost centre or your service what your monthly budget is, whether you're under or overspent, and it gives you a detail of which areas that you may be underspending on and which you may be overspending on. You know, the typical things is on pay budgets, usually you're underspent if you've got vacancies, and you may be overspent if you've got cost pressures such as people on maternity leave or sickness and you're having to use agency or extra capacity. So they're the sorts of things that will be in a budget report. Board report is a summary of the position for the clinical area that we give to the group. So in your clinical areas at your trust, I don't know, let's just say you're part of the medicine directorate or the surgical directorate or the clinical support division, whichever division, group or directorate you're in. Each of those clinical groups will have a monthly board. And what I do I have 2 clinical groups that I look after, so I produce a board report for them that just as a summary of where they are, what the risks are, what are the predictions, and what are the areas of work that they need to be focusing on. And a lot of it is operational, to be honest, because it's the operational things and things that are happening clinically and on the ground that actually influence the pounds and the money. So the board report is just a summary of all of that, and I'll go through an example with you shortly. So just talking about staffing and payroll reports, we tend to send these out in our organisation. I'm not sure if in your own organisations you get things like a nominal role or an establishment report that tells you, well, it provides a list of all the staff names that you're responsible for in your area, who they are, what band they're on, and what they're currently being paid. It's just so that you can check if anybody's left, are they still on the payroll, or you need to check you know, if anybody's had any backdated pay and stuff like that. So for example, you might have had a consultant that had a job plan change, but the job plan wasn't changed a few months later, or the amendment to contract hadn't been done, and so they had, I don't know, let's just say they had an arrears of 1 PA, and so the staffing and the payroll reports sort of give you a little bit of a breakdown of people's pay. So I'm hoping that you will get that information. You can put your hands up if you do. And so again, this is just I would say supplementary information that is available should you require it. So if you need any information around detailed pay for the staff that you're responsible for, there are always additional supplementary reports and information available. And then lastly, activity reports complement the income reports, and again, it just shows patient activity at those levels, such as day case, elective, emergency, inpatients, outpatients, as well as things like high cost drugs and excluded devices and things like that. So we have to monitor the patient activity, which brings in the income as well as the spend. And so collectively, that's what formulates our income and expenditure accounts. So as well as being able to drill down at individual cost centres, it's like a bit of a triangle, a bit of a pyramid. When we do our financial reports, in my groups, I'll do a summary for my clinical group, so the trauma and neuro services group, and also my clinical support services group. So they will get a summary for the group as a whole, but at the same time, each individual budget holder will get their own set of individual reports that make up the summary for the group. And conversely, each clinical group is then consolidated so that we get a higher level trust position that then goes to the trust board every month. And so your chief finance officer will report that to the trust board and also externally to NHS England. So the aim of all of this is so that we, as a hospital trust or any NHS organisation, can provide a set of accounts to NHS England on a monthly basis. That's the work that the finance department do, and obviously it's made up of all the building blocks of the individual specialist services and cost centres, and then they all get amalgamated up into a trust position. So I hope that's been really useful. Again, if you need information on the trust's financial position, you can always contact your finance department. I think our trust last year, because we've just completed year end, so most organisations will have completed their year end accounts, and I think our organisation came in at something like a £300,000 surplus, so just a small surplus against something like an £850 million budget. So very tight on the line. I think most organisations, departments, services are always we're always being steered to stay within our budget and break even if possible. So that's a little bit about reports. We're going to move on and just have a look at an example of a summary board report or a summary income and expenditure position for one of my clinical groups. So I've just taken out some of the text in terms of which group that relates to. So just looking at the screen, I know the answers are there, but we're just going to go through this just to give you a little bit of context in terms of when you see numbers on a spreadsheet. Sometimes, I mean, this is a good one. This is quite a good summary, actually. It's not got that many numbers on. I'm sure sometimes you may receive spreadsheets that have got lots and lots of numbers on, and it can be quite overwhelming to say, okay, what does this all mean? So we're going to put this into a little bit of context. What we've got two boxes that show financial information. We've actually got the box to the far right is the year-to-date position, so that will show how much the budget and the actual spend is year-to-date, and I think that's probably a 9 months worth of, I think that's a position to December or something like that. And then the first financial box tells us what the annual plan is and what the predicted variances, because this is looking at the forecast outturn. So to the right, we've got an actual position year to date, and then in the middle, we've got the forecast position, and it's the forecast position actually that NHS England are always interested in. You know, yes, they're interested in what we've spent to date, but they like to see, okay, where do you think you're going to be by the end of the year? And the reason for that is we need to anticipate any problems or overspends early on, so that we can actually take or have some fighting chance of taking some actions to mitigate against any risks. So just going through this, the best piece of advice I would say is, whenever you're faced with a spreadsheet that looks something like this, where you've got a plan, actual and variance, is I always go to the bottom right hand corner first. So in the year to date box, you can see it's got a figure in brackets, red brackets, 2649. Hopefully everyone can see that. And what that's telling us is that this group, this clinical group, is overspent year to date by £2.6 million. And you have to be really careful of the signs, the brackets and the currency. So at the top of the table, it says it's in pounds, thousands, because usually when we're working with group budgets and trust level budgets, we're talking in hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds. So usually what happens is, when I do a group report, I usually summarise it into millions, as you can see. So £2.6 million is the year-to-date overspend. The forecast deficit is £3.4 million. And you can see that's made up of an annual plan of 44.5 million, with an outturn of 41 million. And so that's driving through an overspend or a deficit of £3.4 million. Now, one thing I would say is anything, well, in our organisation, we always go with brackets is bad. So if it's in brackets, it means that it's adverse and it's not a favourable variance. It means that we're not meeting the plan. And the reason why we're not meeting the plan in this particular instance is we've just going through the 3.4 million. So we start off by going to the bottom right hand corner and we're saying, well, this group has a forecast deficit of £3.4 million, and it's made up of three key elements. The income is at a deficit of 2.2 million. So that's the first line. The total income, we are underachieving by £2.1 million. That's because the plan was to generate £114 million worth of income, but we've only generated £112 million worth of income. And so we've got a shortfall or a deficit or an adverse variance. And these are all things, terms that are used to describe an adverse situation, of £2.1 million. So would anybody like to suggest why there may be a shortfall against patient care income? And just feel free to put the answers in the chat box. I'll give you a clue. We've gone through an exceptional 2 years. Yes, there you go. That's a very good, probably the most common reason. Yes, the last 2 years we've been responding to a pandemic, which means we've not been able to see as many elective patients as we have liked to. We know that sort of national targets of, you know, they're talking about 104 weeks, patients waiting 104 weeks, and how we have to get those down. It feels like long gone are the days where we had 18-week referral to treatment targets, and we're now talking about 52 weeks, 78 weeks and 104 weeks. So that's because we haven't been able to see all the patients that we'd have liked to, and as a consequence, If we don't see the patients and treat the patients, then we don't get the income from the from NHS England. Having said that, some of you will know that we've had some block contracts in place that allows that have given trusts, you know, that sort of flexibility and protection, accepting that, you know, we haven't managed to see the patients. So COVID is one reason. Another reason may be that we don't have the consultants, or we don't have the medical staff, or we don't have the theatre lists to be able to see all those patients. So there could be a number of reasons. It could be capacity issues such as theatres, beds and workforce could all contribute to not being able to see the patients that we need to. So even though we might use waiting lists and agency, it may mean that, you know, that the plan far outweighs our ability to deliver all of it. So those are some of the reasons for the underachievement of income. Another one is coding. Given that we have actually got a coding expert on the call, if we don't code our patients correctly, it means that we're not getting the right amount of income. So even if we are seeing the patients that we're supposed to, if we're not coding them correctly, it means that we're not earning the right amount of income, and so you could get a shortfall on income because you're not coding all the comorbidities and complexities. So coding is very important. So that explains some reasons for the income. So we're now looking at a pay overspend. There's a couple of reasons there again that is causing the budget to overspend. So we're overspent by 1.6 million. And I've just put two sort of very general explanations. One is we could have agency pressures because we've got lots of vacancies, people are sick, people may have COVID, people on maternity, and so, you know, we're using a significant amount of agency premium cost to cover some of those gaps. So agency always comes at a premium. And then we may also have an underachievement of efficiency schemes or cost improvement programs. So as you know, every trust, every specialty, every group is given a national savings target. And because pay tends to make up the general sort of largest proportion of the budget, it's usually about 70% of it. A lot of that gets allocated to pay, but it has been quite difficult to make those savings given what's happened with the pandemic. And with consumables savings, that's usually quite easy. Well, it can be easier to make because we can use cheaper consumables. In this case, we have actually underspent against our non-pay because, okay, I'm going to offer out to the audience to explain why we may have underspent on our non-pay consumables by £400,000. Perfect. Emily, yes, we weren't seeing the patients, so we didn't use the consumables. That's absolutely spot on. So within the consumables, there'll be a couple of conflicting things. We'll have an underspend on, we'll have saved the money on the consumables that we didn't use, but at the same time, what we're noting is, particularly in theatres, is the cost of consumables is increasing. Again, you know, suppliers are using the pandemic as one of the explanations for increasing prices, so we're trying to get our contracts agreed with suppliers. So yeah, so in a nutshell, that's a few examples of some operational pressures that you all might be facing in some way, shape or form within your clinical areas that will have an impact on the finances. And usually what you find is it doesn't matter which organisation you go to or which department you go to, a lot of the explanations for the cost pressures is usually the same. So you could apply this to a lot of scenarios within your own departments and organisations. So I hope that was useful. We're now going to move on to another slide that shows some trends and some income. I hope you can all see the screen. I'm not sure if the figures are a bit small. Grace, is that visible?
It is visible. They might be a little bit small if people are using smaller screens, but
Yeah.
I can see them.
Yeah. And this is why the graphs come in really useful. So I'm going to hand over again to the audience and just I'd like to get your input on the graphs at the bottom of the tables, because the tables just show a monthly plan for income and the actual income that's been earned every month. And you can see that in red brackets where we're underachieving every month, which is similar to the report I showed you earlier about the income underperforming. So I'd just like to offer your any input from the audience as to why the graph in that the first graph on the left is the way that it is, the shape that it is. So why is the income not the same every month is what we're trying to understand here. Yeah, so we've got COVID spikes. That's correct. That would be very typical in the last couple of years. Anything else that might affect the number of patients being seen at certain times of the year? Yeah, we've got recovery. Yes, that's the one I was looking for. Holidays. We all like to take holidays, summer holidays and Christmas holidays. So you'll see, yeah, winter pressure is another one. So for elective work, usually what happens is you can see that between sort of the tail end of July and August, there's a bit of a dip in the activity. So the plan is the blue line actually. So we know that the income isn't going to be the same every single month. So we're always intuitive in terms of planning how many patients we think we're going to see every month. And as you can see, the blue line depicts what we thought the plan was going to be, and the red line shows where we actually were. So we're following the correct trend. So we know that we're usually down in the summer because of summer holidays and down in the winter because of Christmas. But then the activity picks up again over those periods. So this is more prevalent of a normal year. Should I call it normal? What is normal anymore? So I'd say like before COVID, because during COVID the activity was very, very low in the first sort of half of the year until we started recovering into September. And yes, again, you may get COVID spikes as well that makes the activity change as well every month. So that's just a really simple way of seeing run rates and trends and seasonal fluctuations and how that sort of affects our predictions on how we plan for both the income and the expenditure. And usually what happens is that the expenditure, what we spend, tends to follow the same trend with the patients that we see, because obviously if we have high levels of activity, then the expenditure usually goes up. It would make sense, it would seem sensible. So we try to profile budgets and income plans in a realistic way. I mean, obviously with this particular department, even though the activity is following the trend that we would have expected it to, it's still falling short of the overall target. And again, that could be because we've got significant vacancies that we just cannot fill, or it could be that, you know, the plan is just set too high. I don't know if you guys know the sort of latest NHS guidance are telling trusts to be at 104% above sort of pre-COVID levels to get back to a recovered position. And I think our trust, we're well, most of the departments we're in, yeah, it does sound unachievable. So I think most trusts, I don't know about your trust, but they're usually sort of around the 90-95%. Some might be you know, at 100%, you know, fully restored to pre-COVID levels, but depending on which organisation you work and what pressures you have, then that could be quite a big ask. And so what you might see is a target that shows 104%, but actually you're only achieving 99%. So there's another example of why we may be underachieving. So it's going to be an interesting year, I think. So I'm going to move on swiftly to the next slide because I'm just conscious of the time. And here's an example of a budget statement that looks a little bit like a spreadsheet. And again, I've tried to use a very simple extract because I know some of our budget reports can be pages and pages long. So what I've done is I've just took a very simple snapshot of a medical pay budget. And I haven't put any answers on this one because I'm going to offer you the opportunity to just have a look at those numbers and just reflecting on everything that we've spoken about so far. Did you want to input any suggestions or observations of what you can see is happening within this medical staffing budget? So just have a few minutes just to have a look at the numbers and let me know what you think it's saying. Just type it in the chat box. What I tend to do is go to the bottom right hand corner first and see, is it a positive, is it a negative? Anyone brave? Yep, Ingrid, well done. Yes, it is positive. It's not in brackets. Sometimes we use brackets and sometimes they'll say minus. So a minus or a bracket means it's overspent. Yes, so 72k underspent. Thank you, Matthew. Brilliant. So yes. So overall, the whole medical budget is underspent by £71,000. And then what you can do is then start looking at the detail above. And we've got Teresa that has suggested that we've had to backfill with locums. That's absolutely correct. So what if we look at the consultant line, then we can see that the consultant line itself is underspent. So that's the second row. £55,725 is the underspend. And that's because we should have a budget of 38.87 whole-time equivalents. And I know that's a funny number because sometimes people have different SPAs and it's just rounded up. So let's just say we should have 39 consultants. We've only got 33 in post. So we've got a vacancy of about 5 consultants, which means that's underspent. But this month we've managed to get 5 locum, well, round it up to 5 locums. So we are overspent on the locum line, but that's the reason why they're underspent. And it could be the reason why the overspent, the reason why the underspend on the consultants is still £52,000. So the consultants total line sort of in the middle of the page shows in bold text 52,391, and the reason for that is that there could have been vacancies for part of the year, and we've only just managed to get the locums in, and these particular locums could be cheaper than the consultants that we're actually paying because they might have clinical excellence awards and have higher number of SPAs and things like that. They might do teaching and stuff like that. So this is just the cost of the locums that are covering the clinical work. So yes, indicated, Emily's written indicated issues with R&R. Oh, okay, is that recruitment and retention? Possibly, yes. I mean, there are services such as stroke, for example, acute medicine, where it's always difficult. Some areas are always difficult to recruit into. So yeah, and sometimes not even just recruitment and retention, the specialism just isn't out there, or there's a shortage of these type of doctors out there nationally. So yeah, so that's the consultants. Anything around the rest of the report then, around the sort of juniors? I'll give you a few minutes to just try and make sense of what's happening with the junior doctor lines. Similar sort of principles. If you look at the whole times and the actuals, and that might make some sense on the actual spend. I always find the junior doctor budgets are always very tricky to sort of interpret sometimes, because we get so many rotations and things like that. But I'll just, yes, that could be an example. Emily, that's very correct. Sometimes it happens that we get senior registrars that cover some of the consultants' work. So that's one possible explanation for the registrars. And the same with the SHOs. Yes, we are using more registrars that are in the budget for two reasons. Well, actually, there's three reasons. One is, as Emily has correctly pointed out, we could be, some of them might be covering the consultants' work. Some of them might be covering the fact that we've got less SHOs. Or it could be that the SHOs are actually coded to the wrong line and they're appearing as a registrar when in fact they should be on the SHO line, and that happens quite a lot when we get the rotations. Sometimes on ESR they're not coded on the right line, and you might find this happens quite frequently. And another reason could be that we've got people on maternity. And this happens quite a lot as well, because say you've got, and it's not just junior doctors or registrars, but if you've got staff that are on maternity leave, they will always appear in the actual whole-time equivalent because we're still paying them. And so when we're paying people on maternity, we also have to backfill them with other staff, and so that will also generate an overspend. So within the junior doctors, you've got the, coding. There could be a coding issue. We've got more foundation program doctors than other career grades. We don't have any career grades. And sometimes the classification of doctors on the budget report don't always match what's on ESR. And so it might be that you've got the correct amount of doctors, they're just appearing in the wrong classification. But overall, it's all good. We're underspent. And that's it's a good thing from a financial perspective, but it may not be a good thing for the service, because they may be struggling. If they've got a shortage of doctors, then they may be struggling on the ground, and we just have to be conscious of that when we're looking at the finances, that it's not just about the money, it's about the operational pressures that they're facing. And when you meet with your finance managers, you have to sort of talk about these things and say, well, actually, I'm looking to recruit 2 consultants. I've interviewed, and we've got 2 consultants starting in 6 months or 3 months, and then we will feed that into our forecast and our prediction. So we'll reduce the locums and increase the substantive consultants. And the same with nursing. The same applies to any budget, whether it's a medical, nursing, AHP, pharmacy, admin, management. Same principles apply. So I thought, because most of you have a clinical background, it might be useful to show you a medical budget. So I'm going to move swiftly on. I hope that was really useful, and thank you for all your helpful comments. Yes, there could be waiting list initiatives to try and catch up as well. So this service has been using every means possible to try and tackle the backlog, locums, waiting lists, and registrars as well. So that's just a very simple example of a budget report. And this is just a bit of reflection for you guys, really, is when you get an opportunity to read your own budget reports, try and spot some of the issues and possible reasons for the variances and the reasons for the overspend. And another thing I always try to encourage my budget holders to do is suggest any make any suggestions how we can improve the presentation, so it's not just, you know, an ocean of numbers that they're looking at and struggling to find their way around. So again, just a bit of reflection for you in your own organisations. Okay, so I think we've got 10 minutes left. Is that right, Grace? Have we got 10 minutes?
Yeah, that's right, till 1:15.
Oh, brilliant. So we've got a couple of more slides, again, just to show types of information that might be in a group report, group income and expenditure report, and again, some trends. So agency cost is always a very interesting area of scrutiny in most organisations. So, you know, NHS England love to know how much we're spending on agency, what staff groups, and what actions we're taking to mitigate that and reduce that. Within our organisation, we have an agency cap or a target to say that we can spend no more than whatever the number is, I think £18 million or whatever it is. And so each group or clinical area has their own target. But again, it just depends on things like COVID, things like sickness, things like expansion. So, for example, one of the areas I used to look at, that I still look after, is critical care and theatres, and so that was quite massive during the pandemic, the use of agency there just to open up additional capacity, because just couldn't get the nurses. It was a very stressful, sort of intensive time. So we were monitoring our agency spend, and again, you know, colleagues being off sick with COVID, backfilling, people are now suffering with long COVID and things like that. So agency we use to cover maternity, sickness, and also if we need to put on any additional capacity and deal with waiting lists, and you usually have to go through a process of approval for agency through your organisation. And this graph is actually broken down by sort of medical, nursing and admin, and you can see the purple blocks are nursing, agency nursing, and the green blocks are medical. So it's usually 50-50, but because a lot of the wards are nursing based, and we do have a lot of ward areas and a lot of vacancies in this particular area. I think this is neuroscience area. We've got quite a lot of vacancies on the stroke wards and on the neurosciences wards, and so we've got a significant amount of nursing agency there. And so, yeah, it's the operational pressures that really influence the story that the finance numbers are telling, and that's the concept that we're trying to get across here. So that's agency. And we're going to talk a little bit about a budget. And this is just a bit of, I mean, you probably already know what a budget is, but this is just a bit of formal sort of explanation and definition about a budget. It's a plan or envelope of resources. So these are usually agreed with each of the budget holders every year to say, okay, you've got £100 million to spend, and you have to use your judgment and your responsibilities to spend that appropriately, because don't forget, we are looking after taxpayers' money and we're seen as stewards for those resources, and so budgets have to go through a formal agreement process, and we tend to plan on a 3 to 5 year basis. But I think with COVID, I think it's been more like, you know, planning for the next 6 months. Let's see what the next 6 months look like. So the last 2 years have been more, you know, very different in terms of planning. But I think this year now, starting this April, we're looking for a, you know, full 12 months worth of guidance that's come from NHS England. So we've just submitted our plans and budgets to NHS England, and we're just going through a process of agreeing what that is. And then each of the departments will know what their budgets are. I mean, to be fair, it's the way we've done our budgets it's the same as what it was before COVID, so that each of the departments know what how much pay they've got, what their whole time equivalents are, what the non-pay budget is, what the income is, and also what their efficiency target is as well for the year. And just a quick recap on sort of budget holder responsibility. Again, this is just using the principle of being stewards in a stewardship function of tax holders' money and resources. So just to make sure that we follow appropriate financial policies in financial instructions and our delegated authorities. That means that some people may have an authorisation limit of £10,000, and more senior people may able to approve spend to up to £100,000, and then it goes higher than that to the trust board if it exceeds like millions of pounds. And everybody should have a budget holder. You should all make sure that you've kept your training up to date. Make sure you keep your finance managers up to date with any developments, issues, risks and problems, any cost pressures. Let them know what things might happen in the future so that we can create an accurate spend forecast, but also validate the financial information that you receive. So if you receive some information from us, whether it be a budget report or a payroll report or anything, it's always good to validate it and just make sure that it makes sense. And if you have any questions, then just raise those in your monthly budget holder meeting, or just contact your finance department if anything doesn't make sense. So that's just a recap of budget holder responsibilities. Quick recap on a forecast. So again, with traditional budget reports, it's always looking at the past. You know, this is what we spent in the month, this is what we spent in the last 6 months, but it's really important to look at what is happening in the future, because you know the forward look is probably more important than reporting what has already happened. And this allows us to identify and mitigate any operational risks or financial risks, allows you to write business cases, allows you to escalate things to you know, your operational sort of seniors, and also the trust sort of chief officers as well. And the types of things that you should be telling your finance team about are things like any changes in your service, any pressures, and any recruitment plans, levers, or other cover requirements. So that's they're the sort of key elements of a forecast. And lastly, just talking about efficiency programs, you know, cost improvement, efficiency, waste reduction, whatever you would like to call it, isn't going away. In fact, I think, well, it's here to stay, really, to be quite honest. And even though every trust receives a budget, along with that comes a nice little efficiency target. So, you know, our trust, for example, might have a budget of £850 million, but that comes after a reduction of 30 odd million pounds as an efficiency target. So every single specialty in my area that I look after will have an appropriate level of savings to make. So the trauma and neuro group have got £2 million worth of savings to find, and clinical support have got something like £3 million to find, and that could change depending on the plan and how things go over the next couple of months. That could change and that could increase, but we just have to keep finding ways of reducing waste in our organisations and in our everyday sort of operational processes. At UHCW, we use what's called a Virginia Mason lean methodology based on Kaizen, and we call it WASTE. So whether it's reducing time of diagnostics and reducing length of stay, changing drugs, you know, improving the use of biosimilars, reducing drugs wastage on wards. There's loads of things that we can talk about. reducing agency, making theatres more efficient, making outpatients more productive. You know, there's lots and lots of different themes that you may be involved in your own organisations that will contribute to your departments and your organisations' sort of efficiency and waste reduction programmes. And so, yeah, there's a few ideas there on the slide, and obviously you'll get a copy of these to refer to later as well. And so, again, just a bit of reflection. Just think of possible ideas for removing waste and improving the value of costs within your own organisation. And sometimes these are quite difficult conversations, can be quite difficult conversations, but that's where the finance team, your finance team, can help you to phrase those in a way that we can help you to get approved and to help you move forward. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'd like to thank you all again for joining. Hope that was not too intense, and that hopefully you've managed to get some insight into some of the things that we like to try and help you with. I would say please get in touch with your finance department and your finance teams and your finance colleagues and try and put some of this into practice. So yeah, thank you all again. Any questions?
Thanks very much, Pam. That was a great session. And I'm just checking the chat box now and just getting lots of thanks. Very helpful session, which is great. So yes, thank you so much. Just to let everyone know that we did record the session and we'll be making it available after today. And we will circulate the slides that Pam shares with us as well. So thank you so much, Pam.
That's
fantastic
great.
Workshop as usual. Great to have you involved. And thanks everyone for joining. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks again, everyone. See you again soon. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.